Greetings. So, if you hear the chair squeaking, I have an old chair. Yeah, it squeaks quite a bit. The chair I have for this that doesn't squeak so much, the cat's sleeping on, and I just can't bring it upon myself to disturb her lovely little sleep. So, I'm just going to allow for the squeaking chair and let her sleep. So, a few weeks ago, I had I was listening to a podcast. I don't know where sometimes this happens. I was on my way home from work 2 nights ago and passing some roadkill. By the time I'd gotten home, I had a huge story already outlined just from roadkill on the side of the road. It's weird. But I was listening to this thing. Uh, so it was a short or a video on just listening to it on the phone, and something just popped into my mind. And I had the time, and it's very rare that I find myself with this kind of like weird focus. And so I sat down. I had this ancient, I think it's 2013 or 2011 MacBook Pro, a 13-inch I got from a pawn shop, and I had my word processing all set up. So bang, I just like for like those 2 days off, I sat down, and I think within maybe 6.5, 8 hours, I had roughly a little more than 12,000 words of a short story already done. And that's weird because I usually try, I try to write short stories and they end up becoming epics that are finished but not. And this kind of brings to mind the reason for the original reason for the YouTube channel, and that was this is going to get convoluted. The idea was a podcast, which I would read out the short stories or the novels or whatnot as I'm editing them, because I discovered that reading the story out loud actually helped to find things that didn't quite sound right. In passing, as you're like reading through it, you zoom through it. But if you read it out loud, you're slowing things down and you catch things that you wouldn't normally catch. At least this is what I found out. So that was the idea, that I would go through and edit the stories and then I would read off the stories into a podcast. Well, somewhere along the line, I had this idea of, oh, why don't I illustrate the stories? I've been drawing since I was a toddler, so I should have enough skill to be able to illustrate my own stories. And so that kind of inspired the YouTube channel, I suppose. I don't know. It's really weird. I guess this is probably the strange way where I grew up before the internet. And I guess I focused so much on the writing and the artwork that I never thought of the idea of using the internet as a marketing tool. So I'm really behind the eight ball when it comes to this. So just the idea of using this as a platform, it just seems kind of strange. So pardon me, I'm just kind of feeling this out. Anyway, so this short story, this short story, I hope to remain short. There are plenty of opportunities. I think I've gone through the first few pages, just an offhand edit a little bit, but I really haven't gone through it since I finished it. And that's kind of how I do it. If I finish something, I let it simmer in the back burner while I'm working on something else, and then I come back to it clean with a different set of eyes. So, the premise behind this is kind of weird. I think the thing that I was listening to, they were talking about artificial wombs. I thought it's such a ridiculous idea. You might as well just make people out of robots. Well, what if you could just pop babies out of a vending machine? Hmm. So, the the initial title is Black and Blue. It was 7 a.m., which was the original title. I'm kind of on the fence about the title. We'll just finish this thing off and see what it sounds like. Miss Jolene rubbed the back of her left wrist, her heart racing with just a hint of lightheadedness. The rush was not so much the excitement of the moment, her running across the street where the traffic was heaviest, the people on the sidewalks and in the cars looking after her in her fashionable suit of clothes. Her long, shimmering coat that covered her legs just enough to allow her to show off her fine, glittering high-heel shoes. The pedestrians and occupants shaking their heads and shaking their fists and wagging their fingers. No, it wasn't the fact that her crossing the busy street made her the center of their world for the moment, and the center of their annoyance. It was their envy at her glorious stature, her elegance and beauty. She ignored them in spite of her excitement, and she continued past the people standing on the curb, she passing them on her way to the real reason for her excitement. The onlookers marveled secretly while they shook their heads in disapproval. Miss Jolene made her way as if she was the only person on earth, a swagger of feminine effortlessness as she strode towards her destination. Miss Jolene rubbed the back of her left wrist. There was just under the skin a pulsing gold ring, winking with Miss Jolene's heartbeat, a glow which was evident to everyone else, a marker, a sign. She was chosen. This was her moment. The gold ring was one of many colors under the skin, a signifier, a call, a command. Some colors were prized above all, and were permanent. Others were just as prized, but fleeting. They faded in time and required the person bearing the color to move quickly before the color faded. Other colors were looked down upon as if they were brands of sin, of bad behavior, of criminal activity. The condemned had a black ring, which did not glow, but appeared as a tattoo. This was still not the worst of colors, as this meant one's time was short and painless. Some sought this color, and this color alone, because with this brand on their skin they had a set schedule. They knew when the time was coming. Perhaps they were in a situation they could not get out of, in pain or in anguish, which had no solution or appeasement or alleviation. They could only be saved if they were liberated from their anguish by the swift action of the black ring. Others were not so lucky. As soft and as calming and cooling as the color blue was, for the citizen it meant a lifetime labor, your back bent over your work under a bright blue sky. It was indentured servitude because of certain crimes or due to extreme debt. The blue ring was one of the most dire colors to behold. The gold ring was of singular importance. It had no time limit. It was similar to the green ring, a credit limit of sorts. Whereas the green ring was a bottomless allowance of living standard, the gold ring was something entirely different. Miss Jolene succeeded her mother in many ways. While she was not aware of who her mother was, her name, her personal habits, Miss Jolene managed to get hold of an image of her mother and made herself as much a reflection of this image as she could. Miss Jolene had no memory of this entity in any way, as she never felt the uterine warmth and heartbeat of her mother. There was no fundamental transfer between embryo and mother, as such a thing was made ultimately unnecessary by factors of fashion and convenience. All Miss Jolene had, which amounted to maternal connection, was this image, and Miss Jolene was a spitting reflection of this image. It never concerned Miss Jolene that there were so many women in the city and in the country and in the world who looked the same. Such was the magnanimity and glory of this woman that she should have had so many children so close to perfection. Miss Jolene felt deeply and warmly for this manufactured memory, and looked down at the gold ring pulsing under the skin of her left wrist, hoping one day she would be such an image for others to follow. How would it be to have a world population of children who grew up to look just like me? Miss Jolene rubbed the gold ring, but not too roughly, and she didn't scratch. She didn't want to taint the good fortune by defacing the skin which was graced by that gold ring. Because of this gold ring, Miss Jolene walked with purpose, through traffic and through the throngs of pedestrians, trying not to flaunt the gold ring. They cared not one bit, nor even understood, their lives never blessed as hers, while making sure she didn't pollute the moment by touching these people. She weaved through the people, causing some to collide with others close by, just as Miss Jolene passed through, to avoid touching them. They all scattered away from her. They must understand. They are not worthy of this moment, and she had no choice but to walk out in public, feeling almost entirely naked in spite of her coat because of that gold ring. They understood, or should understand, and get the hell out of the way. She marched through the streets and the sidewalks on her way. She felt naked because of that gold ring. In fact, she secretly felt she should be stark naked through the streets, her perfection in the moment so great and grand that it was criminal to hide it from the world. But the world, its petty imperfections and smallness, would be offended at the sight of such glorious perfection. So, she was like every other decent citizen, well dressed for the moment. So, there are other stories I'm working on. The one previously, I think that's Living in the Death Years, or Life in the Death Years. That's a weird one because it's two different stories that are associated in kind of in the same universe, and the idea was to fit them together to make one big story. I don't know. It's one of those things that if you can't commit to it purely and cleanly, then don't commit to it at all. Pardon. So I'm probably going to, they'll be associated. There's three stories that are kind of running parallel in the same thing, and the idea was to originally put them all together, and it just makes it kind of weird. Two of the stories are already kind of finished, and to kind of chop them up into bits and pieces and to kind of glue them together into this weird collage, I think would be problematic. So anyway, that is almost as written, first draft. Not necessarily. I have to kind of prevent myself from editing too terribly much. That is the first 985 words. Maybe I've mentioned this before, but there was a short story I wrote some time ago, and about 41 pages, about the size of this one. And it was almost done, so I figured I was going to add 3 pages. 3 characters that kind of concluded the story, and those 3 characters ended up becoming 580 pages, almost 150,000 words of a first draft. So I'm not very disciplined when it comes to the writing because the mind just goes nuts. The opposite of writer's block can be just as bad, a lack of selectivity. But we will continue on at a later date.